My name is Guy Dinmore. I'm a journalist based in Wales, and I've been commissioned by IPS to interview you. And
yes, go ahead, Guy. Okay. We are ready.
Very good. The 2030 Research and Innovation Strategy sets out research initiatives in 5 impact areas. Some are clearly political and need to be policy driven, such as gender equality, youth and social inclusion, poverty reduction, jobs, market systems, while others are more science-based, such as climate adaptation, plant and soil health. So do you see your role as predominantly political in lobbying governments and international institutions in, for example, assigning more resources into the poorly funded agriculture sector and giving women more land ownership rights?
I think, Guy, as you said it, the CGIAR, it's a science-based organization. So our bread and butter, it's definitely science, and it's mostly applied science, and some of it, it's developmental science to really find solutions. But we all agree that solutions are not all technicals. So some of the component of the solution is technical, but there is a lot of non-technical component of that package of solutions that has to do with policy, that has to do with regulation, that has to do with investment, that has to do with education, capacity building. And hence, I think if we want to be impactful, we need really to bring the data from the different angles. So CGIAR definitely invests a lot in the technical solutions because it's biological problems and we need technical solution. But we are at a mature stage whereby we have the capacity of big data analysis, and hence we could bring in the policy angle, the investment angle, the analysis of data that give us the best setup to make sure that that scalability is happening. And that's where our 5 impact area indeed shows the end outcome. What are we aspiring for in terms of gender, in terms of climate adaptation, in terms of employability and improving lives and livelihood for the smallholder farmers that are producing the majority of the food that all of us as human beings have access to.
Okay, thank you very much. On question 2, so this is just throwing this out there, but do these initiatives address Africa's rapid population growth?
So that's why it's the context is very important for Africa particularly. We all know that really the population growth, it's definitely disconnected from the production growth right now. And as a matter of fact, there was a latest paper by California Tech just a few months ago that gave an analysis of how much productivity has increased in Africa and where did it came from. And it shows that more than the 3/4 of the productivity increase in Africa came from acquiring new land. And hence, it gave us really very strong data to say that if we want to really pace our development with the population growth and the need growth for good food and quality food in Africa, we need really to increase productivity in terms of quantity, but also in terms of quality. So there is a demand for more nutritious food, and there is a demand for more food in the continent. Right now, the continent's bill in terms of import of food, it's very high. So how could we really produce more in the continent? And that's where CGIAR has a huge role to play, because to produce more on the continent, we need to adopt new technologies and innovation. And those new technologies and innovation, some of them are genetic varieties, but there's a lot of, in agronomy, there's a lot of new innovation and technologies in terms of using big data to understand what the soil needs, what the animal needs, what the fish needs. So there is a number of technologies and innovation that needs to be put in place that spans the work of the CGIAR, from genetics to agronomy to access to market to analysis of the policies to make sure that we have a coherent policies that will allow us to push several value chains within the continent so that we produce much more. So to sum it up, Guy, Right now, it's not the case. We need to do it, and to do it, we need a huge adoption of technologies on innovation in the continent. And given the young population, given the young population of Africa, we need to combine that. We need to combine technologies and innovation with youth through agribusiness and agri-entrepreneurship, and create those job opportunities around the agri-food value chain and systems.
Right, thank you very much. You mentioned the large amount that Africa is spending on food imports. I think the figures are something like $80 billion a year. And food inflation has been a huge problem since Russia's invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago. However, is it correct to say, as I've been reading, that much of sub-Saharan Africa is actually seeing success in increasing agricultural production and reducing its trade deficit in food, while resource-rich countries, for example, Nigeria and Angola, and conflict-ridden states like DRC and Somalia fare badly? But is it also the case that some countries that are increasing food production successfully are actually failing to tackle undernourishment, as, for example, I've been reading in Kenya?
So I think, Guy, your question is yes. There is an issue of production, quantity and quality. So malnourishment, it's a huge issue in many countries in Africa. And yes, we have been seeing certain countries really make a huge stride in very short time in producing particularly the food that they have been importing before the crisis, before the COVID and before the war in Ukraine. So definitely those exist. And if it shows something, it shows that it's possible once you have really the political will. When you have the political will from the head of state level particularly, you see it happening. And we saw it happening in some of the countries that you mentioned. So it shows that it's possible. So what we need a plan to do it in more countries. And we need a plan also to diversify our agri-food system. So it's very important to produce wheat and rice because it is a huge in the import bill, but it is also very important to produce very nutrition dense crops like cassava or like vegetables or like fonio and other crops. So there is really a need to mix both, and I think as we are going towards self-sufficiency and the thinking of making sure that we have our basic food produced within the country or within the region or within the continent, we have to keep in mind that climate change is happening, that adapting to the climate change as it is showing its impact should continue. So we need to continue investing in diversifying our crops and our animals and our food, but also really producing the breeds that we need for plus 1.5, plus 2, plus 3 degrees as climate change continue. So tackling both, it's very important, and tackling both based on science and evidence, it's even more important today than ever. And what we are seeing in certain countries like Ethiopia being able to produce its own need of wheat based on varieties that were developed by centers like IITA and CIMMYT, it's wonderful news. But we show how much the leadership at the country level is very important, and the political will, it's pushing that success and making it possible in a very short time. I wish we see the same thing in also resource-rich countries like Nigeria, and Nigeria has been hosting IITA for a long number of years and have been really supporting IITA. And IITA has many, many solutions that if we bring them to scale within Nigeria and within Africa, will make a huge difference in terms of food security and nutrition security and adaptation to climate change.
Thank you. I lost you briefly in the middle, but I caught you back at the end. So I think you actually asked some of the other questions I was going to ask on diversity, for example. So I was going to ask a bit more on the question of investment in agriculture. So back in, was it 2003 with the Maputo agreement, there was going to be a commitment to 10% of national budgets invested in agriculture. But very few African countries have managed to do that. And in fact, in recent years, some countries have actually slipped backwards in the proportion of the budget invested in agriculture. Do you see Africa compared to other countries you're involved in at CGIAR falling behind in investment when it's really an area that should be forging ahead?
Definitely, most countries in Africa are really much below that target of 10%. And also, I could add also much below in terms of the 3% from GDP that was also, let's see, was the target in terms of investment in science and innovation. So definitely the continent is not investing enough in the ag sector, except two countries. We have Ethiopia and Morocco that are close to that 10%, but the rest of the countries are not. But also on science and innovation, which is very important for leapfrogging development, particularly with the latest developments in science and innovation and in science in so many science disciplines. It will be really very important that we get African countries to invest in solutions that are better fit for the context within Africa. So both the ag sector, it's a huge area of investment, both for economic returns, but also for employability, particularly for the youth that we have in the continent. But also compile that investment in agriculture with investment in science and innovation and scaling up technologies. It really could be a winning, let's see, combined solution that address both economic growth, employability, and leapfrogging development and catching up a little bit. One of the data that always mesmerized me, and I find it very unacceptable, it comes from WTO that says that any commodity cross the borders at least twice. So in agriculture, it happens in a case where the product is produced in Africa, it is exported somewhere out in the north, it is processed and come back to the market in Africa. So they are saying at least twice. So some of them, they do cross many, many times. So getting into food processing and getting in agribusiness, it's very important for keeping that return on investment within the continent and for, again, employability of our young population. I can give you an example. I did my PhD on durum wheat genetics. So if you look at the numbers, wheat in the international market, it's about $300 per ton in average. And you go to pasta, which is a very simple processing, and it's 3,000 per ton. So you multiply by 10 by doing a very simple processing. I'll give you the example of quinoa that I worked on for many years. A quinoa per kilo in the international market is about $4 per kilo. You go to processed quinoa, be it puffs, be it chips, be it any kind of quinoa that is food processed, and then the return is about $50 to $150 per kilo. So, and this is the reason behind it's many things. One of them is policies, and the fact that most of the products that we say made of quinoa are a small percentage to rightly encourage the eating of that product, which is very nutritious, but also shows you how food processing can get you much higher return on investment, which is very much needed in the continent. So basically, to sum it up, Guy, is that definitely we need to invest more in the ag sector in the continent to reduce that 80 billion bill of yearly import, but also to provide employability and to leapfrog development in the continent.
I'm going to leapfrog to my last question. Against the backdrop of Africa's population growth and rapid urbanization, there seems to be a constant debate between the proponents of large-scale industrialized agricultural systems, such as AGRA, who criticize what they call the cult of the smallholder, and those who say feeding Africa will ultimately depend on those millions of smallholders. How is CGIAR's position evolving on this, and how is its strategy affected by its major donors?
So I think really, if we look at the numbers, the majority of food right now, it's really produced by smallholder farmers, more than 80%. So definitely for us as CGIAR, we are working tremendously with smallholder farmers. We know that going forward, there will be always the majority of farmers in Africa, be it smallholder, and that's where we need to really to adopt our technologies and innovation for those smallholder. But when you talk about smallholder, I mean, I have the feeling that we are always looking at the two extremes, very smallholder and huge industrialized agriculture, because the reality, it's in between. The reality is that there are different models, particularly co-op or aggregation of farmers or clustering of farmers, that is working very well. So we know that really the small scale farmers, when you are really very small, it's very difficult to adopt certain technologies, particularly when we talk about mechanization and automation. But in the same time, there are models that we have seen over the years whereby there is a way of pulling together farmers to adopt certain technologies. And as a matter of fact, I met with the Minister of Agriculture of Ethiopia just a few days ago, last week, and what they were telling us is that for the wheat, the wheat initiative, the irrigated wheat initiative, they use the aggregation and pooling of farmers together, and they went from 10 hectare in certain areas to 5,000 hectare in other areas. So there are methodologies that could be used, because by the end, particularly for the CGIAR, our mission is really food security and helping countries in least income countries and low middle income countries to have a better life and better livelihood based on agri-food based systems. So for me, we need to go away from this both extreme and look for solutions. We will always have to deal and to work and to support smallholder farmers. And that's where our solution, instead of huge machineries, we have also to adopt small machineries. And this is how Asia has been developed. If you look at it across history, Asia have been able really to adopt small scale machineries to help fishermen, to help herders, to help small scale producers. So we need in Africa to cater for both. We will need industrialized agriculture, and we need to push for continent African companies to do that. But we need also to help smallholder farmers to have enough food to feed themselves, but also to have a better livelihood. So for me, the solution is in between. But I want to just stress that in the CGIAR and across all the centers that work in Africa, we are doing a lot of work from the technical side, but also from the social side and from the policy side to see how we can help smallholder farmers to continue farming. And maybe the best, I mean, the ideal will be that we pay them not only for what they are producing, but also for the ecosystem services that they are doing. And that ecosystem services right now, be it carbon sequestration, be it biodiversity conservation, we are not factoring it in because we don't have the methodologies to monitor it and to monetize it. But in the ideal world, going forward, we could eventually both monitor the carbon sequestration, the ecosystem services, and the food production, and get the farmers, particularly the small scale farmers, to be paid for both of them. Yeah, so yes, Guy, I really believe in diversification, and I'm very, I'm very happy that I co-authored one paper with Tom Hurtel and Frank and a few other colleagues on really diversification and how important is diversification in the agri-food system, but also in terms of policies, in terms of investment. It does build huge resilience at the community level and at the system level. And I hope really that with the CGIAR, we can diversify more to other neglected, underutilized species and bring them back. And my ideal is that if we use the science we have today to breed those underutilized species in plant, for example, we could really do it very quickly. And I like very much a number that I got from a private sector in Argentina. And what they said is that in the old days, it takes about $100 million and about 15 years to have a variety, crop variety in the field or in the farmer's field. Now with the technology called gene editing, that $100 million went down to 5 million, and the timing from 15, we get it to about 5 years. So what if we use the technologies, I'm not saying only gene editing, many, many other technologies exist that will allow us to really to breed more diverse, neglected, underutilized species and get them to the farmer very quickly. In the old days, many of the countries in Africa could not afford it because it was too expensive, because it takes a lot of resources. But now with these new technologies, maybe we can speed up the breeding. And what we know really from the heirloom seeds that you said you are part of in the Wales, so the heirloom, which is the old seeds, they are seeds that are always more nutritious, more adapted to climate change, because we haven't breeding them only pushing for productivity, which happens with the other bred varieties, whereby for the first years, for I would say between the 60s and the 2010 or so, we have been focusing on productivity. So by focusing on productivity, we might have lost some genes around nutrition, for example, and around climate change adaptation. So that's where bringing them back, it's very important. And there is a very interesting program that is led by the US called VAX. And the VAX stands for Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils. And within that VAX program, and the CGIAR, it's a big player in the VAX, along with FAO, IFAD, and many other organizations, is that really we bring in the crops that maybe we haven't paid attention to in the last few years, bring them back, use technology, breed them very quickly, and bring them to the farmers. So those will span crops like the fonio, of course, cassava, maybe even when you go into crops that we know like rice, it's looking at the African rice species that we haven't bred much, and so on and so forth. So it touches up on a larger number of species, but also within the species that we know, like rice and wheat, it goes to land races. It goes to species that we haven't used in our gene pool, and by doing so, we have really came to a very narrow genetic basis in those staple crops. So it will benefit the staple crops, but it will benefit much more the non-staple crops that we haven't worked on for the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. In Wales, we lost a heritage grain called a hen Gymru, which means old Welshman, and it was revived again. We found it in Russia.
Wow, and that's
brought it back to Wales a few years ago.
That's wonderful, and you know, one of the major assets of the CGIAR, it's the gene banks. So the gene bank in the CGIAR are really conserving that genetic diversity. So it's very interesting. Sometimes when we go back to the gene bank, we find species that breeders haven't used for the last 50 years, but we can bring them back, use them, and use them for breeding better varieties and catching up those genes maybe that we missed in our focus for productivity versus quality. So you might want to look into the gene banks of also CGIAR to see if that particular clone or breed, it's also in our gene banks.
Yeah, I'll have a look.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's fascinating talking to you.
Thank you.
I think we've had over half an hour, so I should probably end here. So I wish you all well in your new exciting job.
Thank you very much, and nice meeting you online, and good luck for your trip to Asia.